what about a woman that decides she doesn't need sex or intimacy ever again for the rest of her life? Definitely not with you. It's not my responsibility to give him sex.
Yeah.
Talk with us about that. My wife says that I should go get my needs met elsewhere, or she doesn't want to spend intimate time with me. And I'm wondering, do I deserve to have my needs met in relationship? How do I understand what I should and should not ask for? That's what Cynthia and I are going to talk about here today on the C Note Show with myself, Jeff Allen, and Miss Cynthia Kruse. She and I, if you don't know, are retired teachers. We were social, emotional, and special education teachers. We have 15 years, over 50,000 hours in this field, and we've been coaching men in one-on-one and in groups for a long time now, since 2016, focusing on working with men and families so that you can have a phenomenal long-term relationship. We specialize in bringing things back from feeling like it's drowning, because we want you and your wife to feel safe and inspired. We want you to know how to lead her in an intimate way with mojo and confidence and avoid mistakes. And we want you to learn how to cultivate what Cynthia and I practice personally and what we teach professionally of a level 3 relationship, a deep, conscious, ever growing, intimate relationship with your wife. And whether your wife wants to join you on that journey or not, there's no way for us to know, but you have to have the skills to cultivate that. And that's what we teach here. Last time we spoke about how Dax Shepard attracted Kristen Bell and how he kept her attracted, let's say, through his own boundaries, through his own standards and wants. So go back and watch that one if you haven't seen that one. And today we're going to talk about the 3 universal relationship needs, and do you deserve to have your needs met? Marcus Aurelius: very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself and your way of thinking. Okay, easy to say, guys will say. That's easy to say when you have support and safety and sex happening and intimacy and trust and a solid career, let's say, and your kids are happy with all these things. And yes, of course, it's in the way in the way you think about your situation. But what else? From the Gottman Institute, John and Julie Gottman, doctors John and Julie Gottman, why you need to accept your partner's needs. And this woman, Heather Gray, in her article here from the Gottman website, core needs are not negotiable in marriage. And what is she talking about? Her quick story, she said, the first time contempt showed up in my marriage, it was quiet, condescending, and it came from me, she said. I'd made plans with my friends and was calling my husband to wish him a good day when he asked, when will I hear from you? That one question rattled every independent bone in my body, she said. What did he mean, when would I hear from you? He was hearing from me now. I was going to be with my friends later. That was the whole point of me calling. I wasn't expecting to talk to him again until the following day, she says. What do you mean we're not talking until tomorrow? He asked. I thought since we weren't seeing each other later, we'd be talking tonight. And that's when I said, really? I simply did not understand his notion of checking in, keeping in touch, or staying emotionally connected while apart. I was single for years before meeting him. I wasn't used to staying in touch with someone, and I didn't see that as a reflection of how I felt about him. I could be in love with him and still not need to talk with him multiple times per day. However, that wasn't his style. He needed to connect regularly. And to finish this article, our core needs are not negotiable. Successful relationships come down to basic questions about our core needs. What do I need in a relationship in order to feel loved, happy, fulfilled, and secure? What do you need in a relationship to feel the same? Are you willing to meet my needs in this relationship, and am I willing to meet yours? If your partners are unwilling to meet our needs, the relationship cannot thrive. If we're unwilling to meet our partner's needs, the outcome remains the same. It didn't matter whether or not my husband's need for our regular connection challenged my sense of independence, she said. It didn't matter whether or not I believed it to be a worthwhile need. It only mattered whether or not I was willing to give him what he needed. If his needs challenged my own, if I couldn't give him what he needed, or if I simply didn't want to give him what he needed, I needed to take the door, she wrote. I loved him more than I cared about having to check in. At the end of the day, I loved him more than I was challenged by regular connection. I was willing to meet his need in order for our relationship to succeed. Well, that's nice. That's nice of Heather to write here. And that's nice when your partner wants to meet your needs. What if you're being needy? What if your own childhood shit's getting in the way? What if your insecurities, little boy, getting in the way? What if your lack of skills are getting in the way? These are things we talk about every single time on this show. This is from PhD gentleman Mr. Meek here, Universal Needs in Relationship, the Importance of Companionship, Affection, and Support. And he writes, these are the top 3 universal needs, says Dr. Meek: companionship and belonging, affection, both verbal and physical, and emotional support and validation. He writes, for couples, these needs are ideally met in the partnership. Strong couples are able to be good companions, sharing their day-to-day lives, give verbal and physical affection, affirmations, hugs, sexual intimacy, compliments, and provide emotional support, being there to help during tough times, validation when the person is struggling. In a healthy relationship, both members of a couple get used to depending on the other for these needs, and when they're not met, each person starts to become dissatisfied, which ultimately can lead to a breakup. Individuals that are not currently in a partnership need to have these needs met in other ways. And we all need to have our needs met in ways. And so finally, Mark Manson, you already have everything you need, right? I'm giving us different points of view on this idea here. Do I deserve to have my needs met? Mark Manson writes, we cling to the people and objects that fulfill our needs, and this makes us a slave to them. When our only conduit for feeling appreciated is our looks or money, then we will become enslaved to our appearance and money, both of which are cruel masters, he writes. If we feel like our lover is the one and only person on the planet who can make us feel this way, we cling to them and smother them with our demands and affection, shackling ourselves to them because what is living if it's without them? Much of our lives are controlled by a sense of scarcity. We mistake the objects that provide for our needs for the needs themselves. You don't need your lover, you need to be loved. You don't need your job. You need to feel secure. You don't need to be beautiful, cool, or popular. You need to feel appreciated. What you need is you. And the Stoics continue on to write, well, all right, if I'm going to look at Stoic philosophy, if I'm going to look at being a monk in Buddhist philosophy, if I'm going to be a priest, well, if I'm not going to have sexual affection, what would the Stoics write that I do need for a flourishing life? And these 3 things we talk about: virtue, control, and responsibility. We teach that in our groups and in our one-on-one. So I want to ask Cynthia about this now. We're going to go into some concepts here that Cynthia and I teach and that we believe. So Cynthia, let's start with first blush. I just read a lot of different points of view articles from psychologists, from doctors in counseling, from Mark Manson, who's an author in this field. So what is your initial take on this idea of, do I deserve to be happy? Do I deserve to have my needs met? Do I deserve to have my needs met in relationship? So talk with us about this.
Yeah, and I just want to say right off, even this whole topic, there's a lot of mud to it because there's a lot of arguments on both sides. I think even women get the message you shouldn't need anything from anyone, and it's disempowering to actually need from another. When I think about relationship and I think about romantic relationship, there's a heart feeling in me of whether you're a man or a woman trying to be with someone who doesn't respond in any way to a core desire that you have, or even something that you hold. I am worth intimacy. That's a very painful place to be. It's a practice to have that reflection back. I do believe that the most empowering thing a woman can do, and the thing I respect and honor most in the masculine, is an owning of need, an allowance of need, because even that personal accountability with that takes away the desire to always rope someone else in. It's merely a standing in one's own worth. And when I do stand in front of men who claim their worth and their desire and allowance to be human beings, to be men, to have intimacy needs, there is something so powerful and grounded in them that I don't feel when the masculine feels forced to push needs away or circumvent or push down needs because he's been told to.
Yeah. So give us an example of a man that you've worked with who just wants to live in his head. He doesn't want to feel any emotions. He wants to push everything away. He's sort of misinterpreting this as I shouldn't have any kind of needs whatsoever. I shouldn't feel anything whatsoever. What is that like professionally and as a woman for you to be sitting across from?
Yeah, I mean, I have so much empathy for why in that situation this man would desire to do that and try to cure his mindset that he shouldn't need anything, especially intimacy. But that head energy, that pushing away of just his basic humanity, it feels very unsettling to be around. And I find myself, even though I'm in a professional setting, holding space in my feminine, I find that I don't trust him innately because it feels like there's some story that's shooting through his body that he won't speak to, own, and I'm just supposed to ignore.
Hmm. And how do you compare that to a man that uh, knows what he wants in the world, but isn't upset that he's not getting it from you in this moment? And we talked about this as in you and I have been together for almost a decade now. And prior to that, we were both single. And what's the difference between a man that you come across who knows what he wants, but isn't upset that he's not getting it in that moment?
I mean, that reminds me of our topic. I believe it was the last call, and that had more to do with embodiment and how masculinity in its embodied state, when you are in that kind of self ownership, without that, it's so contained and so powerful. You can walk into a room and the gravitational pull follows you. And that's a very stabilizing, grounding feeling to the feminine. And it even brings her own nervous system a peace just even being around you.
As a man, when I look out the window every morning, there's the pane of glass that's immediately in front of me. There's the trees, there's the mountains in the background, and then there's my vision of the future, let's say. And every one of these levels, every one of these panes of glass can have a different focus, right? So do I get obsessed with the dirt that's on the pane of glass? Do I get lost in the trees and the mountains? Do I just get stuck in my pontificating of what I don't have of the future? These are all different things that we can focus on as a man. So let's go into the chat, and then I've got some more I want to ask and bounce off of Cynthia, including these ideas of do I deserve something versus what is my worth, and what is the difference between a standard and a boundary. We're going to go into that, but let's look at the chat first. We want to hear from you guys. Man says, I struggle with this understanding. Where does my individual power to meet my own needs end? And where does my wife's desire to meet my needs begin? Well, that's a fantastic question. Of course, guys tell us every day, uh, it's easy if you're just with a woman brand new, you're not married, you don't have kids. It's easy just to leave someone behind. But the men that we work with and what I associate with is you've been in relationship for a long time, you have kids together, you have deep connections together, and you want to see if you can grow through this to and be empowered through this. And if you cannot, with this particular woman, you want these skills for the future with it for the next woman or women that you're with. And so you want to have these skills regardless as a man. So where does my individual power to meet my own needs end? So if I, for instance, uh, never approach you for intimacy, or if in case we know him quite well, if his woman does not want to meet him, where would you say, from knowing us, from knowing from many other calls, where would you say that his wife's desire to meet his needs actually needs to begin or should begin in a relationship?
Well, I would say she has that responsibility to relationship from the day that she began relationship with you. Is she in a pattern of shutdown and pullback and promising and then not following through? Absolutely. That doesn't change that the incredibleness of femininity is in its response to the energy in front of her. So if masculine brings an invitation and it's a true invitation in that embodied place, and she can't see that as the gift that it is to be invited into this inside skin feeling of her body with you, she can't receive that as a gift. That's really her loss. In relationship. Is a woman failing if she can't respond to grounded invitation from the masculine? Yeah, she is failing in that way. It doesn't mean there aren't good reasons for that and pains and traumas from the past. But for her to have a full, flourished life in her feminine body with you, intimacy and touch and connection in your space, in your container is really important.
So, what about a woman that decides, and I'll use air quotes because I'm going to ask you this question. What about a woman that decides she doesn't need sex or intimacy ever again for the rest of her life? Or definitely not with you.
Mm.
And so I don't need that ever again. How dare you, Cynthia, say that she's not living a fulfilled life or she's somehow not following through on responsibility? It's not my responsibility to give him sex.
Yeah.
Talk with us about that.
Yeah, and I can feel the part of the feminine that can feel so pressured and can feel like it has nothing to do with her and she's just expected to meet the masculine's needs, and that can make her feel very unindividualized and just like a body. However, if she's come to that story and that interpretation of how she wants to live life, that doesn't in any form take away or bury that you as a man who are still wanting to be alive in your own being and your own sexuality doesn't take away from that. The need, the worth you have of deserving to have that in your life uh, with the work that you do is still 100% accurate. And her shutdown doesn't get to take away from that.
Monroe, the hard part for me is allowing my marriage to tap into deep emotions that you share with each other. And then to have that abruptly taken away with no warning and then living without my spouse and feel in purgatory. That's incredibly painful. Absolutely. He wrote, Cynthia, I had the energy when I was in the house. That energy brought my wife and my son together for discussions, laughter. Then my wife pulled the rug out, and we are now separated for 11 months, no contact. I feel totally stripped and confused. Absolutely. Do you have a question there? Yeah, there's no doubt that that's horrendously painful. Certainly. Curious what your question is. Another man wrote, 75% of your core needs to be met by your partner. 25% is something you need to self-soothe. I'm not sure where those percentages come from. Please write a question if you have a question about that. I'm not sure. Another man, yeah, that's right on, Cynthia, he said. Another man, through this journey, I've gotten to a liberating place. I went from a very high libido, needy energy to a more relaxed energy. Do I still have high libido? Yes, but it's not needy. If I never touch a woman romantically for the rest of my life, I'm okay with it. I've got shit to do. It's not the goal of my life. I do want it. Do I desire it? Yes, of course, but it's not a desperate need. Looking forward to seeing how that plays out when I start dating again. Yeah. First of all, you're really okay if you never touch a woman romantically for the rest of your life. I mean, I literally traveled to Southeast Asia and met monks who gave up all of those things. Yes. And we could talk about another time about how feeling fulfilled spiritually may fill you. But if you want romance in your life, I mean, we know you a bit, right? So you're okay with it if you never touch a woman romantically, but it's something that you want. And that's the dichotomy of what we're talking about here, right? And where do I get those needs met? Do I want it and desire it? Yes, it's okay, but it's not desperate. That's what I want to point out, is that you don't feel desperate for it any longer, and that's phenomenal. So even for a man that's either still in a relationship with his woman and they're in limbo, or a man that's moved on, what's the difference when you sit across from a man that's not in desperate need versus, let's say, he's feeling resentful about not getting something? So he's in anger versus he's relaxed about it.
Yeah, the anger, your woman will feel that as judgment of her, and you might be having judgment of her for very good reason, but she will use that energy of your very real frustration, resentment as fodder to feed the story of why she shouldn't be intimate with you anymore. It's almost like you're giving her more bricks to build the house, the wall around her, whereas I want it, but I don't need it. There's even the way you were saying it, it was felt so powerful. It's that magnetism I was referencing, like walking into the room as a man. Uh, you have gravitational pull when you are balancing those two energies, and that can be very enticing, even if your wife is not then responding the way you would want her to that. It levels up her ability to feel respect and honor who you are, versus the reverse experience of using your negative emotions to almost devalue your masculinity in her eyes.
Yeah, that was a big mistake that I made in the past, was thinking that getting upset was going to get my way. And that might work on the schoolyard, that might work in sports, that might work even in your work situation, but it's not going to cultivate the type of relationship you want. So let's talk about that right now, and then we'll go back to the chat here. So the idea of I deserve something versus I am worthy of. And this deserve idea. So if I'm a man who's doing this work, Cynthia, and let's say, go to my wife and say, I deserve intimacy. I heard on the Cino show today that I deserve to have my needs met. Okay, woman. And all right, I'm exaggerating, of course, but the idea of she's not giving me something I deserve versus the energy of I'm worthy of connection. I'm worthy of growth and depth and intimacy. What's the difference in those two feelings, those two ideas, two approaches?
Yeah, I mean, I can even, so I'll first always go into like the humanness of it. And do I, as a woman, have the you know, I deserve verbal affirmation in relationships. So, women have their deserving energy too. However, in that example, the claiming of the worth, it goes back into that feeling your masculine form, the redwood tree of who you are, having respect and honor for your energy, versus the I deserve this from you. If I really pay attention to my femininity in that, it's a immediate withdrawal. And I've heard women reference this as they can feel like their partner or is kind of trying to reach in and take something from them. Um, and that can make her really build up resentment over time and distrust over time.
Man, I spoke with yesterday, a new one-on-one client. He's out of the Northwest. Anybody that lives in the Northwest says the Pacific Northwest. Like, okay, yeah, the North, the Northwest, lives in the Northwest. His wife happens to make a lot more money than he does. She's a surgeon. And he said to me, I'm just getting burned out with how much she works and the 24-hour shifts that she has and how much I'm watching the kids. And it's just absolutely killing me. It's absolutely killing me. And he feels shameful about the reverse of the traditional dynamics, right? Where she works, makes more money. He's actually an engineer and makes great money himself, but she blows that out of the water with what she does. And he felt really shameful about, well, can I get help? Should I really need help? Am I being a failure as a father if I need help on these marathon 24 and 48-hour shifts that she works, and the in-laws aren't helping? And we talked about this exact idea of, it's not that you deserve XYZ, it's that you are worth having time on your own. Your children are worth you feeling recharged when you're around them. Your wife is worth you being full in your own self, not resentful toward her. So what else can we do? You are worth having help. You are worth bringing other professionals into your life to help you. So this idea of I should have to do it all on my own, that's sort of it's not masculine to beat your head against a brick wall. The brick wall is not going to give before your forehead does. That's just silly. So bringing worth into your life. What is it to have a standard for yourself, a request, what you want to invite into your life, versus a boundary, something that you will not put yourself around? You will no longer join into that situation. You're no longer okay with someone treating you in a bad way. You're no longer okay with a relationship that's devoid of this connection. So to you, when you do this work with men and when you see this work with women, what's the difference between a standard and a boundary to you? A standard being a request for something I want to cultivate in my life, whereas a boundary is something I no longer want in my life, but that I'm in control of. Just
Yes,
here.
the boundaries feel like a lot more of an external statement energy. And I think upholding a personal standard feels more of something that you know inside yourself. And it's almost like there's nothing that's going to make my standard dissipate. And I'm unattached to whether this person meets my standard. But it kind of goes along that line of I have standards for how I choose to be treated, how I choose to be received in my masculine. Um, because I'll call back the deserve word. You do deserve to be received in your masculine, and having a standard around your worth as a man and the gift you give with your attention. I can't state that enough, how much I wish you knew that mattered and that hold held so much weight.
Yeah, to me, a quick story I recall of standard versus boundary. So I was a businessman. I went into restaurants, I ran restaurants, I went into then real estate and banking, all in my 20s to try to chase money. And so I had this standard of how much money I wanted to make. Now, because I had a standard of what I wanted, it didn't mean it's going to happen immediately. But then once I got into banking, was in a cubicle, the politics, the soul death, the meaningless hours that I was asked to work that didn't actually attribute to anything, that didn't help anyone in the world in the bank, then I began to have a boundary that I don't want to work in a soulless environment. I don't want to work in a cubicle where I'm punching numbers all day long. I want to actually affect people face to face. And that's when I went back to school at night. I worked multiple jobs in the day so I could become a teacher. This is over 15 years ago now. So the standard for the money and income I wanted to make didn't go away, but I pressed pause on being, let's say, attached to how much money I made in that moment because I wanted to shift gears. I wanted to learn and how to be in a new field. And the boundary I had was I'm no longer going to work in a soulless and cubicle environment. So it took me some years to replace my income that I had back in my 20s. And now I make multiples more than I did at that time and multiples more than I did as a teacher, of course. And so the standard that you have of the kind of life and love and connection and intimacy doesn't mean it's going to happen immediately, right? So let me ask you this in a different way. So often men hear from their wife, well, I have a boundary of you never initiating sex with me. I have a boundary of this, or you're not living up to my standards as a husband. And where do you see that go off the rails, this idea of standards and boundaries with women who, let's say, have just picked up a self-empowerment book for the first time and are kind of thrashing around in the marriage? What do you see there that can really be off the rails?
Yeah, I find that like very painful because I understand the energetics behind it for women. However, it feels like they adopt this idea of boundary and standard in a very black and white way. Uh, and inherently, the feminine is shades of gray. And so when I see a woman putting out a boundary around something, so she'll never feel a certain emotion again, or she'll never feel more close to her heart emotions again, it feels like she's taking two shields and just crunching her whole femininity. Trying to make the world black and white. And that's not how that works. In order for the feminine to have real freedom from uncomfortable feelings, there needs to be waves in her boundaries, that she needs to feel things that are uncomfortable and then straighten herself and breathe herself through them. And in terms of standards, you can see in the popular culture a woman might say, I my standards are, a man must be 6 feet tall and this and this. And what that's really trying to claim in them is a feeling of value and worth in their feminine energy, which that to me is a red flag that they don't feel that way at all. Because again, they're getting very black and white and they're trying to control the world. They're trying to control you because they feel so deficient, unseen, and not okay in that softer part of themselves.
Let's go to the question in the chat. He asked you to go deeper and explain more of the masculine and feminine energy
Hey
types.
guys.
So your question of the energy types, I think other such as family things pulled my wife away because she couldn't handle family dynamics and my energy level. She decided to remove my energy to deal with other dynamics. Yeah, what's your question for Cynthia about that? Please.
Well, I mean, God, Cynthia, you touch on so many things. You know, the energy level of the masculinity, I think, is fascinating, and I haven't heard that before. A lot of people don't touch that, but you know, you're right. I think in the beginning there is that attraction with the masculine and the feminine. And my question is why? I guess as you were just finishing up by saying the shields go up, everything's got to be black and white. But what I don't understand is, as a husband, you're with a woman for 10 years. You share these feelings, and everything is good. You know, you're totally devoted. You're totally committed. My son is autistic. Totally devoted to both of them. And then there's a shift. Those shields go up, but it's against the masculine. And I think that there is a divide that comes where a part of the world is she's reacting to the feminine, and she can't handle the masculine, the other energy of her, you know, in my case, the husband, and I'm the one who gets shut off. So I don't understand how a man doesn't see that happen. Like it's almost as if it's a light switch when the wife decides, because there was a period where she was cold and hot. It would be like, okay, I was walking on eggshells when she's cold. And then when she's hot, I'm like, okay, maybe things are a little bit better. Let me just step back from the edge. And then bam, gets cold again until makes a decision to totally stay cold. So my point is, how come a guy, or at least in my perspective, doesn't see that or doesn't see that coming? And a woman can just get to that point without revealing that, because they're not sharing anything. Because through those cold spots, there's more distance, and you can tell there's distance. The emotions aren't being shared, the thoughts aren't being shared, and you're like, okay, what is going on? Because you're, as a guy, you're not changing that. You just want everything going the way that it's going, and then all of a sudden there's a change. Why does a woman do that?
That's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. Let's pause there. Yeah, Cynthia.
That is such a good question.
Well, and what you were saying was the worthiness and deserve. I'm not the kind of guy that says deserve. I feel like I am worthy. My stepson, I raised an autistic son for 10 years who turned out, I met him as a little squirt, couldn't even talk right. And now he's grown into a really confident young man. And I feel like I'm worthy of that respect and love because of what I did, but not just for him and for her, for always being there. And that is cut off because I'm not the deserving kind of guy. I feel like I'm worthy because I think deserving is a little more selfish. But on the other side is, what happened? Why does a woman do that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to press pause and we'll have Cynthia answer. So please, I'm sure it's a very simple, straightforward, easy answer, right? So why does this happen?
Well, first, I really appreciate that you said that you are worthy of their respect, her respect and honor for how you guided, respected, held space for such a unique, wonderful young man in the world. And I'm so sorry. I would imagine it almost feels like your masculinity for that got kind of used and then it got, discarded. I think the pain point here is women do feel like they're trying to communicate something to you, even in the hot and cold. So the cold was communicating something in a very unlogical, unconcrete, inverbal way. It was trying to be heard. And then she kind of decided, oh, I guess I can let that go, or something else seem more important. And the pain of it is the feminine never just goes away. That pain that caused the cold is always there. It's just how much stamina she has to hold it for herself. And because that she has no skill to verbalize it, because she's not bringing it to you like another man would, because she believes her very subtle nonverbal communication is the way to communicate, uh, she ends up feeling very unheard and like you don't care, which is grossly unfair. But that's when a woman finally gets to the breaking point. She feels like she's probably spent a good 2 years trying to say, hey, hey, uh, and then misinterpreting the amazingness of your masculinity, that whatever she's going through doesn't really matter. And that's like, I don't matter is what turns her off completely.
Yeah, there's core habits in this work that we've seen over and over. And one that Cynthia is talking about now, I would say, is we assume she thinks like us and she assumes that we think like her. And those are both wrong. And we all have to learn how to do relationship, how to do marriage, how to do love. And my mistake, and I don't know about you or every man that's watching this, my mistake was a lot of times I just didn't want a problem. I just wanted things to like, just let me focus on work. I feel fucking overwhelmed. Her emotions are just a pain in the ass, or I don't know how to deal with them. At least part of me thought that. And so I just wanted things to be fine. I just wanted, and then when she goes cold, often men think, oh, good, she's not bothering me anymore. Oh, or things must be okay. Things must be fine. This may not be you, but this is me in the past. Things must be fine. And she's thinking, how could he be so daft? He's being so insensitive. And it's those misunderstandings that happen. On top of that, we all have to learn how to be a lover. And that's a big piece of our coaching. That's a big piece of these calls and our group and our my one-on-one coaching is how do I actually do the skills of being a lover? It's like a completely new sport. If you've never ridden a bike and I try to throw you on a bike, you're going to crash, skin your knee, bang your head. You're going to think it's a pain in the ass, especially if I put that bike on sand or on gravel or in a snowstorm. It's going to be really hard to learn how to ride a bike in that situation. And that's where often men come to this work. They're in the middle of a snowstorm. The bike has a flat tire and they're asking, why can't I pedal 5 feet down the road? Why is this so hard? It's like, well, we have to learn all these dynamics first. That was a great question. It's, complicated and we're happy to talk about this more. And that's what we do here on these calls. All right. If you want more from us, guys, greatmenmovemountains.com/new subscriber to get on our book wait list, get notified with new teaching videos, to get invited to our group calls, all that fun stuff. And this excerpt I pulled from David Deda's book, Dear Lover, chapter 27. I want to ask Cynthia about this to close us out for today. The point of this book is he's a man writing to a woman as if he's her lover, and he's speaking to her heart, her soul, her desire. And in this chapter, he's writing, wanting to be opened. He writes, I love feeling your love, he says to her. I love feeling your love, but also I love feeling you open to my love. We've practiced the art of loving consistently. Now our hearts are connected in love so deeply. I enjoy feeling the play of your shyness and coy resistance. When you playfully refuse me or push away, I can feel the certainty of love smiling deep in your heart. You know that I will come through your closure to claim your heart wide open. I enjoy feeling your resistance while I ravish you open. We both know you are already mine. Now, what does this mean? It means that this man is not upset when she is hot or cold. This man knows and he sees, even if she's not exuding it now, that she has love and smiling deep in her heart as he writes. He knows that he wants to practice the skill of opening her, of claiming her, even if in this moment she's pushing him away. And he sees the greater dynamic there beyond just the pane of glass, beyond the trees, beyond the mountains. He sees into the future. He sees into her heart metaphorically. And so what's that feel like when you're with a man in relationship and you work with men in this way and women in this way, when even in her hot and cold closure, he sees beyond the moment and he sees the smile in her heart as this writes. He sees the love in her heart, even when she's not happy right now.
It feels like being given the gift and the space to take a really big breath. Often women get really hardened and black and white when they feel the only way for them to have freedom is to push away, push away, push away, even push against you feeling like, damn, like I don't want it to be this way. that's like, oh, at least I have some freedom. And that's not really a full deep breath, versus seeing her through this with your masculine eye. It allows the possibility of these things that she's been clinging to so hardly to kind of loosen her fingers, to breathe deep into her own being. And everything in that breath, deep breath, that really touching into her own self, is the way through for the feminine, to respond to you, to be able to heal, to be able to be the woman that she most wants to be.
Thank you, Cynthia. It's great to see you. See you guys next time. Thank you, Cynthia. Bye, guys.